Let's walk through this carefully because what is really on trial here is not Catholic theology, it's the incarnation itself. Mike's claim is straightforward. In divine simplicity, God's power is identical with God's essence. Therefore, if Jesus is any way limited, then he is no longer God. And if he is no longer God, Christianity collapses. On paper, that sounds tight. But here's the problem. Mike is refuting a version of Christianity that Christians do not hold. Noah responds with an analogy.
We believe that Jesus, who is God, came down from heaven and became man. He limited his divine powers, but not his divine essence. And that does not make him any less God than he was before.
And that makes no sense because God's power is God's essence in your model of divine simplicity. God cannot cease to be all-powerful and still be God because that's what makes him God.
A great way to explain this is with an analogy. I like to play a lot of indoor basketball with my little brother. Now, he's a lot smaller than I am, so I tend to play on my knees to make it more fair. I'm limiting my power, but it doesn't make me any less me.
The instinct here is correct. Voluntary restraint does not equal loss of identity, but here's where we need to be precise because analogies can help or hurt depending on how far you push them. Christian theology does not rise or fall on analogies. It rises or falls on what Christ actually is. So instead of defending the analogy, let's defend the doctrine. Christianity does not teach that Jesus stopped being omnipotent. Christianity teaches that the eternal Son of God assumed a human nature. That distinction matters. Scripture does not say God lost something. It says God took on something. Philippians 2 tells us that Christ, though he was in the form of God, emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant. The emptying is not a subtraction. It's an addition. If you miss that, everything else collapses. Look at the Gospels. Jesus gets tired. Jesus sleeps. Jesus hungers. Jesus suffers. Jesus dies. If Mike's framework were correct, the only options are these. Either Jesus was never God or the gospel writers were lying, but scripture also tells us that Jesus forgives sins, commands nature, receives worship, and raises the dead. So what do Christians conclude? Not a contradiction, distinction. The same person acts according to two natures. This is exactly why the church formally defined Christology at the Council of Chalcedon. Christ is one divine person in two natures, fully God, fully man, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. And that's not philosophical fluff, that's precision born out of controversy. The early church had already fought and rejected the idea that Christ merely appeared human and also rejected the idea that his divinity was diluted. Athanasius famously said, "What is not assumed is not healed." If Christ does not truly assume human limitation, then humanity is not fully redeemed. Now let's talk about divine simplicity because Mike leans on this hard. Yes, God is simple. Yes, God's attributes are identical with his essence, but divine simplicity applies to the divine nature. It does not mean that God cannot freely act outside himself. The incarnation is not a change in God. It is a change in creation's relationship to God. God remains immutable. Creation changes. That distinction is basic classical theism, not a Catholic loophole. The Catechism explicitly states that Christ's human knowledge and experience operated in a genuinely human way. That does not mean ignorance in his divine intellect. It means that his human mind experienced growth, learning, and limitation because it was truly human. Aquinas is very clear on this. Christ possesses all divine perfections in his divine nature, while his human nature operates according to human limits. If Mike's objection worked, it would also refute Aquinas, Augustine, and the entire Nicene tradition. Mike says God is not limited and cannot be, and Christians agree, but Christianity does not teach that God is limited. It teaches that God entered into limitation. That is the difference between a philosophical deity and the God of the gospel. If your concept of God cannot allow him to humble himself, then your concept of God is too small. The incarnation is not weakness. It is authority expressed through humility. And this matters because if Christ is not fully God, he cannot save. And if Christ is not fully man, he cannot stand in our place. The entire Christian faith hinges on the reality that Jesus Christ is one divine person with two complete natures, not blended, not diminished, not divided. The word became flesh. That is not a contradiction. That is the gospel. Mike is not refuting Catholicism. He is refuting a misunderstanding of Christianity. And once you understand what the church has taught from the beginning, his argument collapses. Thank you for watching, and God bless.